Good morning, sixth graders. Today we're going to answer questions 6, what happened to Mr. Dussel's cushion? Number 7, how did the men scare off the burglars? And 8, what caused the family to sit in the dark for 2 days? It's a really exciting part in the diary. It's actually 2 parts, so we're just going to read half of it today. You're welcome to continue reading if you want to know what happens. But these are the questions that we're answering today. All right, let's go ahead and get started.
Tuesday, 11 April 1944. Dear Kitty, my head throbs. I honestly don't know where to begin. On Friday, Good Friday, we played Monopoly. Saturday afternoon, too. These days passed quickly and uneventfully. On Sunday afternoon, on my invitation, Pater came to my room at 4:30. At 5:15, we went to the front attic, where we remained until 6 o'clock. There was a beautiful Mozart concert on the radio from 6 o'clock until 7:15. I enjoyed it all very much, but especially the Kleine Nacht music. I can hardly listen in the room, because I'm always so inwardly stirred when I hear lovely music. On Sunday evening, Pater and I went to the front attic together, and in order to sit comfortably, we took with us a few divan cushions that we were able to lay our hands on. We seated ourselves on one packing case. Both the case and the cushions were very narrow, so we sat absolutely squashed together, leaning against other cases. Mouschi kept us company, too, so we weren't unchaperoned. Suddenly, at 8:45, Mr. Van Daan whistled and asked if we had one of Dussel's cushions. We both jumped up and went downstairs with Cushion Cat and Van Daan. A lot of trouble arose out of this cushion, because Dussel was annoyed that we had one of his cushions, one that he used as a pillow. He was afraid that there might be fleas in it, and made a great commotion about his beloved cushion.
So there's the answer to number 6. Why was he upset about his cushion? And that's our vocab word commotion for next week.
Pater and I put 2 hard brushes in his bed as a revenge. We had a good laugh over this little interlude. Our fun didn't last long. At 9:30, Pater knocked softly on the door and asked Daddy if he would just help him upstairs over a difficult English sentence. "That's a blind," I said to Margot. "Anyone could see through that one." I was right. They were in the act of breaking into the warehouse. Daddy, Van Daan, Dussel, and Pater were downstairs in a flash. Margot, Mummy, Mrs. Van Daan, and I stayed upstairs and waited.
So right here, it's not one of our questions on the green packet, but it's going to be an extra credit question on the test. What kind of figurative language is that? That's a blind. And what does it mean? So we'll talk about that one a little bit more later. Also, another piece of figurative language, an idiom, they were downstairs in a flash. What does that mean? Okay.
4 frightened women just have to talk, so talk we did, until we heard a bang downstairs. After that, all was quiet. The clock struck 9:45. The color had vanished from our faces. We were still quiet, although we were afraid. Where could the men be? What was that bang? Would they be fighting the burglars? 10 o'clock. Footsteps on the stairs. Daddy, white and nervous, entered, followed by Mr. Van Daan. "Lights out. Creep upstairs. We expect the police in the house."
So right here, she does a really good job of sensory details like the magic 3 we were talking about and the special details for effect. We have the word, and we actually even have alliteration for frightened. We have the F and the F. We know how they're feeling. They heard a bang downstairs. After that, all was quiet. She describes the color had vanished from our faces. That's another way of saying that they went white as a sheet, similar to the something we had a few weeks ago. So you can tell it's very tense. They're frightened. Would they be fighting the burglars? It's always good to have questions in your expository writing or descriptions. It just changes up the monotony of having declarative sentences. Daddy was white and nervous. So very tense, and she does a good job of explaining that.
There was no time to be frightened. The lights went out. I quickly grabbed the jacket, and we were upstairs. "What has happened? Tell us quickly." There was no one to tell us, the men having disappeared downstairs again. Only at 10 past 10 did they reappear. 2 kept watch at Peter's open window. The door to the landing was closed, the swinging cupboard shut. We hung a jersey round the night-light, and after that they told us. Peter heard 2 loud bangs on the landing, ran downstairs, and saw there was a large plank out of the left half of the door. He dashed upstairs, warned the home guard of the family, and the 4 of them proceeded downstairs. When they entered the warehouse, the burglars were in the act of enlarging the hole. Without further thought, Van Daan shouted, "Police!"
So how scary. At that moment, burglars were actively breaking into the warehouse downstairs. They had gotten a piece of the door out. So there was just an opening into the warehouse, which you guys know leads to the secret annex. And so, just in an act to get them to go away, Mr. Van Daan yells, "Police!" hoping that they'll run away. And that's, I believe, number 7, the answer to it.
A few hurried steps outside, and the burglars had fled. In order to avoid the hole being noticed by the police, a plank was put against it, but a good hard kick from outside sent it flying to the ground. The men were perplexed at such impudence, and both Van Daan and Peter felt murder welling up within them. Van Daan beat on the ground with a chopper, and all was quiet again. Once more they wanted to put the plank in front of the hole. Disturbance. A married couple outside shone a torch through the opening, lighting up the whole warehouse. "Hell," murmured one of the men, and now they switched over from their role of police to that of burglars. The 4 of them sneaked upstairs. Peter quickly opened the doors and windows of the kitchen and private office, flung the telephone onto the floor, and finally the 4 of them landed behind the swinging cupboard. End of part 1.
So there were people outside that could actually see into the warehouse and possibly hear what was going on.
The married couple with the torch would probably have warned the police. It was Sunday evening, Easter Sunday, no one at the office on Easter Monday, so none of us could budge until Tuesday morning. Think of it, waiting in such fear for 2 nights and a day. No one had anything to suggest, so we simply sat there in pitch darkness, because Mrs. Van Daan in her fright had unintentionally turned the lamp right out, talked in whispers, and at every creak one heard, "Shh! Shh!" It turned 10:30, 11, but not a sound. Daddy and Van Daan joined us in turns. Then 11:15, a bustle and noise downstairs. Everyone's breath was audible, otherwise no one moved. Footsteps in the house, in the private office, kitchen, then on our staircase. No one breathed audibly now. Footsteps on our staircase, then a rattling of the swinging cupboard. This moment is indescribable. Now we are lost, I said, and could see us all being taken away by the Gestapo that very night. Twice they rattled up the cupboard. Then there was nothing.
Can you guys imagine how they're feeling? They just have to lay quiet for a few days, and they can hear people coming. They can hear them entering the house, and they're just laying there absolutely terrified that this is it. We're finally going to get caught.
The footsteps withdrew. We were saved, so far. A shiver seemed to pass from one to another. I heard someone's teeth chattering. No one said a word. There was not another sound in the house, but a light was burning on our landing, right in front of the cupboard. Could that be because it was a secret cupboard? Perhaps the police had forgotten the light. Would someone come back to put it out? Tongues loosened. There was no one in the house any longer. Perhaps there was someone on guard outside. Next, we did 3 things. We went over again what we supposed had happened. We trembled with fear, and we had to go to the lavatory. The buckets were in the attic, so all we had was Peter's tin wastepaper basket. Van Daan went first, then Daddy, but Mummy was too shy to face it. Daddy brought the wastepaper basket into the room where Margot, Mrs. Van Daan, and I gladly made use of it. Then Mummy decided to do so too. People kept on asking for paper. Fortunately, I had some in my pocket.
So I don't know if you guys understand what's going on. They had to use the bathroom, and they didn't have the buckets that they usually use for times like this. All they had was a wastepaper basket. So they all just kind of had to take turns, and everyone else turned aside, but her mom was too nervous. And then here comes our vocab word, ghastly. And you can imagine if everyone's using the same bucket to use the restroom and it just sits there, it would smell ghastly.
The tin smelled ghastly. Everything went on in a whisper. We were tired. It was 12 o'clock. Lie down on the floor then and sleep. Margot and I were each given a pillow and one blanket, Margot lying just near the store cupboard and I between the table legs. The smell wasn't quite so bad when one was on the floor, but still Mrs. Von Don quietly brought some chlorine, a tea towel over the pot serving as a second expedient. Talk, whispers, fear, stink, flatulation, and always someone on the pot, then try to go to sleep. However, by 2:30, I was so tired that I knew no more until 3:30. I awoke when Mrs. Von Don laid her head on my foot. "For heaven's sake, give me something to put on," I asked. I was given something, but don't ask me what. A pair of woolen knickers over my pajamas, a red jumper, and a black skirt, white oversocks, and a pair of sports stockings full of holes. Then Mrs. Von Don sat in the chair, and her husband came and lay on my feet. I lay thinking till 3:30, shivering the whole time, which prevented Von Don from sleeping. I prepared myself for the return of the police. Then would have to say that we were in hiding. They would either be good Dutch people, then would be saved, or NSBers, then would have to bribe them. Footnote: the Dutch National Socialist Movement. "In that case, destroy the radio," sighed Mrs. Von Don. "Yes, in the stove," replied her husband. "If they find us, then let them find the radio as well." "Then they will find Anna's diary," added Daddy. "Burn it, then," suggested the most terrified member of the party. This, and when the police rattled the cupboard door, were my worst moments. Not my diary. If my diary goes, I go with it. But luckily Daddy didn't answer.
So they know that she's been writing in her diary this whole time and that they're talking about everything that's been going on. So that's one of the first things they think of. What if they find Anne's diary? They're going to know for sure what's going on. So I'm guessing that the most terrified member of the party is Mrs. Von Don. And of course the first thing she says is, "Burn it!" Not my diary. If my diary goes, I go with it.
There's no object in recounting all the conversations that I can still remember. So much was said. I comforted Mrs. Von Don, who was very scared. We talked about escaping, and being questioned by the Gestapo, about ringing up and being brave. "We must behave like soldiers, Mrs. Von Don. If all is up now, then let's go for Queen and country, for freedom, truth, and the right, as they always say on the Dutch news from England. The only thing that is really rotten is that we get a lot of other people into trouble, too." Mr. Von Don changed places with his wife after an hour, and Daddy came and sat beside me. The men smoked non-stop. Now and then there was a deep sigh. Then someone went on the pot, and everything began all over again. 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 5:30. Then I went and sat with Peter by his window and listened, so close together that we could feel each other's bodies quivering. We spoke a word or two now and then, and listened attentively. In the room next door they took down the blackout. They wanted to call up Coupuis at 7 o'clock and get him to send someone around. Then they wrote down everything they wanted to tell Coupuis over the phone. The risk that the police on guard at the door or in the warehouse might hear the telephone was very great, but the danger of the police returning was even greater. The points were these: burglars broken in. Police have been in the house as far as the swinging cupboard, but no further. Burglars, apparently disturbed, forced open the door in the warehouse and escaped through the garden. Main entrance bolted. Crawler must have used the second door when he left. The typewriters and adding machine are safe in the black case in the private office. Try to warn Hank and fetch the key from Ellie. Then go and look around the office on the pretext of feeding the cat.
So because it's such a long entry, we're going to stop there. You're welcome to continue reading if you want to know what happened. If not, we'll pick up later on this week.